It's not the soreness that gets you. It's not the bruises, and it's not even the ego hits. You walk into the jiu-jitsu gym with wide-eyed enthusiasm, expecting to be trained by masters, to unlock secret skills that will make your body feel like a weapon. And then, enthusiasm meets reality in about 2.5 seconds. You get smashed, you're gasping during warm-ups, and tapped 5 times in a single round. But then you rationalize that maybe you're not being trained yet, but you're being tested. Just like in those old martial arts movies you grew up watching. So you keep showing up. Until one day, the real truth hits you. The master never shows up, and those superpowers never materialize. You're just an old man, out of shape and out of his depth. And that's when most people quit. Because the myth died, and they weren't ready for what came next. So today, we're talking about what actually separates the few who survive that first 6 months on those jiu-jitsu mats from the ones who disappear. It boils down to who's willing to let go of the myth inside of their head and face a brutal truth that you don't find magic in jiu-jitsu, you build it. One humbling roll at a time. Welcome to the Alchemy of Struggle, baby. So oftentimes people walk into jiu-jitsu gyms thinking they're going to be entering some kind of a temple, like those old school martial arts flicks from back in the day. There's an emotional fantasy. I'll finally feel powerful. They're going to see my potential. But in reality, you're mostly being ignored. A common complaint of new students to jiu-jitsu is this: the coach doesn't even pay attention to me. He just ignores me. Well, there's a reason for that. Because these jiu-jitsu coaches are experienced. And their experience tells them that you're probably going to quit. And they don't want to put too much time and effort into someone who won't be there in a few weeks. Yeah, it sucks, but it's true. You're not walking into a temple when you walk into a jiu-jitsu gym. You're walking into a storm. And storms don't explain themselves. So what comes next is this disillusionment dip. Around weeks 3 to about 8 is when you start seeing people with the fantasy start to drop off. They realize the fantasy just isn't true. Warm-ups still wreck you. That same blue belt keeps tapping you with the same choke. And the worst part, no one explains why. And then you finally realize no one's coming to rescue me. No one's giving me the roadmap. There is no curriculum. And this is a crucial time. I want everyone to pay very close attention here, because there's a gap that happens here. And if you don't close that gap quickly, you will not survive that first 6 months. The gap that I'm talking about is the time when your enthusiasm dies, but before you've had time to develop good habits. Getting off of work, grabbing your gear, and rushing over to the jiu-jitsu gym. Eventually, that just becomes a habit, but it takes a while to build those muscles. And that gap between enthusiasm dying and you developing that habit is where people disappear and never come back. And this is when people start spiraling. I'm too old. I'm wasting time here. I'll never catch up. But understand this, you're not failing. You're just finally meeting reality for the first time. And that reality does not care about your expectations or your feelings. And this is where we get to what I call the survivor's shift. What separates those who remain from those who disappear. And it's not toughness. The ones who survive make one brutal choice. They realize, I'm not owed anything, so I'm going to have to earn everything. They stop comparing. They stop waiting for external validation. They stop asking, am I getting better? And instead they ask, am I showing up fully? And this is when jiu-jitsu becomes a mirror instead of a John Wick movie looping in your head. They let the myth burn and they build something from those ashes. This is where alchemy begins. And this is what I call the inner mat. What most people never realize is that the hardest battles are not fought on the mats. They're with your own story that you refuse to let go of. The ego wants fast transformation. That's where the whole how to get good fast thing comes from. But the mat demands a slow death of those illusions. So you thought you were coming to learn submissions, but you're coming to learn surrender first. What I'm referring to is you finally realizing that this thing takes years, not weeks or months. And this is where the path changes. It's not flashy, but it's damn sure real. Look, I remember when I first walked into a jiu-jitsu gym. I knew nothing about jiu-jitsu, nothing about the culture. And I'm a child of the 80s who grew up on Sunday morning Kung Fu theater, all the ninja movies, and Bruce Lee posters. I walked into that jiu-jitsu gym expecting something very different than what I got. Instead of the traditional martial art that I thought I was learning, it felt more like walking into the wrestling room in high school. And when that music came on during the rolls, I was like, what the hell? So it was a little weird and a little off-putting at first, but the inner mat appears when you choose truth over comfort. So if you're caught in the thick of it right now, if the myth just died and you're stuck in that gap, hear this. You're not behind. You're just at that part that no one warned you about. You're not failing, you're being forged. That feeling of, I don't belong here, that's actually a good sign that you're finally shedding the fantasy and approaching the real path. And if you do make it through this phase, in that first 6 months, something changes. Not all at once, but slowly, as you stop chasing the myth and start letting jiu-jitsu change you. And that's the irony that no one tells you about. You showed up for transformation, power, discipline, and all of that. But none of that begins until you accept that it's harder than you thought and that it's going to take longer than you want. Only then does this thing start to rewire your brain and reshape your body and change the way you move through the world. And that's what we're going to explore in next Tuesday's video. Make sure you don't miss it. And if you haven't seen it yet, go back and watch the other video on this channel that talks about what it's like returning to jiu-jitsu after years off. It hits even harder if you're in this phase. And as always, I want to thank the subscribers and the commenters. I read every single comment, so please keep them coming. And if you have a question or a topic that you want me to discuss on this channel, send a message to the email that's on the screen. And remember, there are others who need to hear this message, so let's help them find it. Like, share, and subscribe. Keep up the good fight and stay safe on those mats. Peace.